Welcome to another deep dive. Today we have a very interesting source. It's a document filled with just one word, Fein.
Fein. Yeah, it's kind of intriguing, isn't it? You look at it and think, is this a joke at first glance? It almost seems absurd.
It does, yeah. I mean, is it some sort of like art project gone wrong? But
Yeah.
that's what we do here. We love a good challenge, so let's see what we can make of it.
Yeah. I think maybe one way to approach this is to think about this document in terms of semiotics.
Okay.
Semiotics is basically the study of signs and symbols and how they create meaning.
Right.
And so in this case, you could argue that the word feign itself is a sign, and the repetition of it, the spacing, the whole visual layout becomes part of this symbolic language.
So instead of reading it as just a word, we're looking at the whole document as a kind of code to crack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the first things that strikes me is the consistency of it. You
Yep.
know, it's the same font, the same size, the same spacing throughout the entire document. And that kind of uniformity, I think, is really key here.
So it's not just about the word, it's also about how it's presented.
Yeah.
So maybe the creator of this is trying to make a point about, say, mass production or conformity.
Yeah.
You know, like we're just bombarded by these same messages over and over again.
Yeah, that's a very interesting interpretation.
Yeah.
It makes me think of some of the theories about minimalist art, where the artist is very deliberately stripping away all unnecessary elements to focus on this single, powerful concept.
I can see that. Yeah. It's like this document is very simple.
Yeah.
But then it can open up these much bigger ideas.
Exactly.
But we shouldn't forget about the word itself, though. I mean, it is German, right? Fein?
Yes, fein is a German word.
Does that give us any clues, do you think?
Absolutely. Fein in German can mean fine or delicate, but it also has these connotations of politeness, refinement, even a little bit of formality.
Hmm.
And so you have this interesting tension between the simplicity of the repetition and then the more nuanced meaning of the word itself.
Yeah, I like that. So the creator of this is sort of playing with those contrasts, forcing us to think about how language can be both straightforward and also loaded with these subtle meanings.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so interesting. We're not just decoding a word, we're decoding a whole system of meaning.
Right. And a system of meaning that might tie into the cultural context.
Yeah.
It's not a word you hear every day, you know, even in German. It evokes a certain era, a certain social class.
Right. It's like the creator is almost using language as a time machine.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Transporting us back to a period where formality and precision were very highly valued.
Yeah, like we're not just looking at a document. We're stepping into this whole cultural landscape. But hold on. I mean, before we get too carried away, let's go back to the document itself and look at the visual structure of it. Okay, let's get visual. What are you seeing that I'm maybe missing? All right, so we're back and we're ready to get visual with this Fein phenomenon.
Mhm.
What stands out to you when you look at the layout of the document?
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting is how the document utilizes white space. We've already talked about the consistency of the font and the spacing between the words, but the spacing between the lines, I think, is also very deliberate.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't really thought about that before. There's a definite kind of rhythm created by these breaks. It's almost like stanzas in a poem.
Exactly. And it makes me think of this concept in visual art called negative space.
Okay.
It's basically the space around and between the subject of an image. And in this case, the white space surrounding the feign actually ends up emphasizing the word and its repetition.
So it's like the silence between notes in a musical piece.
Exactly. Yeah.
It gives shape and meaning to the sounds, or in this case, the words.
A fantastic analogy. I love that. The white space isn't just emptiness. It's an active element that's contributing to the overall impact. It forces us to pause to consider the word and its repetition in a new light.
I'm starting to see how even something as simple as this document can be analyzed on all these different levels. But isn't there a risk of overanalyzing? I mean, at the end of the day, it's just the word feign repeated over and over again.
Yeah, that's a valid point, and it's something we always need to be mindful of when we're interpreting art. We
Yeah.
bring our own perspectives and biases to the table, and we would be projecting meaning where there is none.
So how do we balance our own subjective interpretations with maybe more objective analysis of the document?
Right.
Is there even such a thing when dealing with something this abstract?
Well, I think the key is transparency. You know, we acknowledge that our interpretations are just that they're interpretations. They're not the definitive truth. We lay out the evidence, the patterns that we see, the potential connections to these broader artistic or cultural movements. But we also have to leave room for other perspectives.
So we're basically saying to our listener, here's what we see in this sea of feign, but you might see something totally different, and that's okay.
Exactly. And in fact, I think that's what makes this kind of analysis so exciting. It's not about finding the quote unquote right answer. It's
Hmm.
about sparking a conversation, encouraging people to think critically and engage with the material in their own way.
I think that's a great approach, and it ties back into what you were saying earlier about semiotics. It's not just about decoding some fixed message that's there. It's about understanding how meaning is created through this whole interplay of signs and symbols and cultural context.
Right.
And in the case of this document, there's another layer of meaning we need to consider, and that's the historical and social context of the word fein itself.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that it's not a word you hear every day, even in German. What can you tell us about its history and how that might inform our understanding of this document?
Well, Fein has its roots in Old High German, and it's always had these connotations of refinement and elegance and a certain social status. Think of fine dining or fine art or fine craftsmanship.
So the word itself carries a sense of exclusivity, maybe even a bit of snobbery.
It certainly can. And that adds another layer of complexity to our analysis. Is the creator using feign, ironically? Are they critiquing the values that it represents? Or are they embracing those values, creating a document that's meant to be appreciated by a select few? It's like the word itself becomes a gatekeeper,
Yeah,
filtering out those who don't understand its subtle nuances.
exactly.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. We've gone from this seemingly meaningless repetition of one word to a discussion about social class and artistic intention and the power of language to include or exclude. But before we get too lost in the theoretical weeds, I have to ask, so what does it all mean? Like, why should we even care about this document filled with the word feign?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to be honest, I don't think there is like a single definitive answer. But what's so fascinating to me about this document is that it really forces us to confront the nature of meaning itself.
Yeah, it's like we've been trained to look for meaning in words, in sentences, and stories.
Right.
But what happens when we're presented with something that just defies all of our expectations? Something that's both simple and complex, familiar and strange, all at the same time. I think we're challenged to kind of think differently, to question our assumptions about what constitutes art communication, even thought itself. In a way, this document is kind of like a Rorschach test.
Okay.
What we see in it reflects our own biases, our own ways of making sense of the world.
So the meaning isn't inherent in the document. It's something that we create through our own interpretation.
Precisely, and that's where things get really, really interesting, because it's not just about individual interpretation, it's also about how those interpretations interact with each other, how we as a society kind of negotiate meaning, especially when we're confronted with something that seems to defy easy categorization.
So this seemingly simple document opens up this whole can of worms about art culture communication,
Sure.
the very way we think. I have to admit, I never expected to go this deep when we first started talking about a page full of fame.
And that's the beauty of it. We started with something seemingly trivial, maybe even absurd, and we ended up exploring some pretty profound ideas. And I think that's a valuable lesson in itself.
It is, yeah. It reminds us that there's potential for discovery and insight everywhere, even in the most unexpected places. But before we wrap up, I'm still curious about that question you raised earlier about the creator's intention. Do you think we can get any sense of their motivation from this document?
Well, it's impossible to say for sure, of course, but I think it's really worth considering the act of repetition itself. Why would someone choose to repeat the same word over and over and over again for pages on end? What does that say about their state of mind, their relationship to language, to communication, to the world even?
Yeah, it's like they're trying to make a point, but they're not quite sure how to articulate it. Or maybe they're trying to break through the noise. You're constantly bombarded with information by just stripping everything down to its bare essence.
Exactly, and that's what I find so compelling about this document. It's a mystery, it's a puzzle, but it's also a mirror. It reflects something back at us, something about our own need to make meaning, to find order in chaos, to connect with something beyond ourselves.
You've given us a lot to think about. I don't know if we cracked the code of feign, but we definitely uncovered a wealth of fascinating ideas along the way.
And that's what the deep dive is all about.
That's right.
We're not always looking for answers sometimes, we're just exploring the questions.
So to our listener out there, the next time you encounter something that seems strange, repetitive, or just plain baffling, don't dismiss it out of hand. Take a closer look, ask some questions, and you might be surprised by what you discover.
You might even find yourself on a deep dive of your own.
And who knows, you might just uncover a whole universe hidden within a single word. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brains buzzing.